family since she was a toddler. One day, when Ellie came home from school, Trudy announced that she had given the cat away because it had messed in the house. Ellie was devastated, but as Trudy told Ellie years later, we didn't give a damn about your feelings. We just kept a roof over your heads. Sarah's story. Sarah, whose mother was emotionally inhibited and standoffish, had a very strict upbringing. She remembers that her mother always seemed to be holding herself back emotionally, as if behind a great wall. But Sarah cherishes a memory of a morning when her mother stood quietly by her bed, fondly watching Sarah sleep before waking her up. Sarah was already partly awake, but she didn't move so she could enjoy this moment of secret closeness with her mother. Once she was fully awake, the wall went back up and her mother kept a proper distance. Deeper effects of being emotionally shut down. Sorry. Obviously, being 35 minutes in is taking its toll on me. Of course, emotionally immature parents were once children themselves, and as children, they may have had to shut down many of their deepest feelings in order to be acceptable to their own parents. It's likely that Ellie's and Sarah's mothers also grew up with parental insensitivity toward their feelings. Many emotionally immature people were over-pruned early in life, growing up within a very limited range of acceptability. Their personalities are like stunted bonsai trees, trained to grow in unnatural shapes, because they had to bend to fit their families who were unable to develop fluidly. Because they had to bend to fit their families, they were unable to develop fluidly into the integrated, natural people they might have become. It may be that many emotionally immature people weren't allowed to explore and express their feelings and thoughts enough to develop a strong sense of self and a mature individual identity. This made it hard for them to know themselves, limiting their ability to engage in emotional intimacy. If you don't have a basic sense of who you are as a person, you can't learn how to emotionally engage with other people at a deep level. This arrested self-development gives rise to additional, deeper personality weaknesses that are common among emotionally immature people, as outlined in this chapter. They are often inconsistent and contradictory. Instead of having a well-integrated sense of who they are, emotionally immature people are more like an amalgam of various borrowed parts, many of which don't go together well. Because they had to shut down important parts of themselves out of fear of their parents' reactions, their personalities formed in isolated clumps, like pieces of a puzzle that don't fit together. This explains their inconsistent reactions, which make them so difficult to understand. Because they probably weren't allowed to express and integrate their emotional experiences in childhood, these people grow up to be emotionally inconsistent adults. Their personalities are weakly structured, and they often express contradictory emotions and behaviors. They step in and out of emotional states, never noticing their inconsistency. When they become parents, these traits create emotional bafflement in their children. One woman described her mother's behavior as chaotic, flip-flopping in ways that made no sense. This inconsistency means that as parents, emotionally immature people may be either loving or detached depending on their mood. Their children feel fleeting moments of connection with them, but don't know when or under what conditions their parent might be emotionally available again. This sets up what behavioral psychologists call an intermittent reward situation, meaning that getting a reward for your efforts is possible but completely unpredictable. This creates a tenacious resolve to keep trying to get that reward, because once in a while, these efforts do pay off. In this way, parental inconsistency can be the quality that binds children most closely to their parent, as they keep hoping to get that infrequent and elusive positive response. Growing up with an inconsistent parent is likely to undermine a child's sense of security, keeping the child on edge. Since a parent's response provides a child's emotional compass for self-worth, such children are also likely to believe that their parents' changing moods are somehow their fault. Elizabeth's story. Elizabeth's mother was emotionally unpredictable and kept her guessing. She always felt anxious when approaching her mother. Would her mother push her away, or would she be interested and engaged? Elizabeth told me, I had to read her moods constantly. If she seemed negative, I would keep my distance. But if she was in a good mood, I could talk to her. She had the power to make me happy, and I tried my best to win her approval. As a child, Elizabeth often worried that she had caused her mother's negative mood changes. Feeling responsible, Elizabeth came to the conclusion, I must be flawed. Elizabeth wasn't a flawed child, but the only way she could make sense of her mother's moods was to think they resulted from something she did, or worse, something she was. They developed strong defenses that take the place of the self. Instead of learning about themselves and developing a strong, cohesive self in early childhood, emotionally immature people learned that certain feelings were bad and forbidden. They unconsciously developed defenses against experiencing many of their deeper feelings. As a result, energies that could have gone toward developing a full self were instead devoted to suppressing their natural instincts, resulting in a limited capacity for emotional intimacy. Not realizing the magnitude of their parents' developmental limitations, many children of emotionally immature people think that there must be a genuine, fully developed person hiding inside the parent, a real self they could connect to if only their parent would let them. This is especially true if the parent was occasionally affectionate or attentive. As one woman told me, with my parents, I used to pick the good part of them I liked and pretend that was the real part. I would tell myself that this good part would eventually win out, but it never did take over. I also used to pretend that the hurtful parts of them weren't real, but now I realize it's all real. When people's defenses have become an integral part of their personality, they're as real as scar tissue in the body. It may not have belonged there originally, but once formed, it's enduring. These limitations become a major part of people's personalities. Whether they can ultimately become more authentic and emotionally available depends on their ability to self-reflect. People often wonder whether their parents can ever change. That depends on whether their parents are willing to self-reflect, which is the first step in any change. Unfortunately, if their parents aren't interested in noticing their impacts on others, they have no impetus to look at themselves. Without such self-reflection, there's no way to change. Hannah's story. Hannah had always longed for a more intimate relationship with her stern, hard-working mother. As an adult, on one visit, she asked her mother to tell her something about herself that she'd never shared with Hannah before. This caught her mother off guard. First, she looked like a deer in headlights. Then, she burst into tears and couldn't speak. Hannah felt that she had simultaneously terrified and overwhelmed her mother with this innocent inquiry. She had unwittingly gone straight through her mother's defenses to a long hidden place of sorrow, exposing her mother's unmet childhood longing to be heard by someone who was interested in her experience. Hannah's interest and empathy overwhelmed the defenses her mother had developed in response to the lack of that kind of human connection. She simply couldn't deal with Hannah's attempt at emotional intimacy. For those of you following along, we're on page 42. Page 42 out of 47, so almost there. Incomplete development leads to emotional limitations. Despite being highly emotionally reactive, emotionally immature people have a paradoxical relationship with emotions. They're quick to get emotionally aroused, but they're scared of their most authentic feelings. This is to be expected if they were raised in a family milieu that didn't help them deal with their emotions, or that may have even punished them for being upset. The sooner they can avoid their feelings or get over them, the better. They find the world of deep emotions extremely threatening. They fear feelings. As children, many emotionally immature people grew up in homes where they were taught that the spontaneous expression of certain feelings was a shameful breach of family custom. They learned that expressing or even experiencing these deeper feelings could bring shame or punishment, resulting in what psychotherapy researcher Leah McCullough and her colleagues have called affect phobia. McCullough et al., 2003. Having learned to link their most personal emotions with judgments about being bad, they can no longer stand to acknowledge certain feelings, especially those related to emotional intimacy. As a result, they anxiously sought to inhibit their genuine reactions, developing defensive behaviors instead of experiencing their true feelings and impulses. Ezreal, 1952. Affect phobia can lead to an inflexible, narrow personality based on rigid defenses against certain feelings. As adults, these emotionally immature people have an automatic anxiety reaction when it comes to deep emotional connection. Most genuine emotion makes them feel exposed and extremely nervous. Throughout life, their energy has been devoted to creating a defensive facade that protects them from emotional vulnerability with other people. To avoid dangerous emotional intimacy, they stick to a well-worn life script and resist talking about or processing emotions, including in relationships. As parents, they pass down this fear of vulnerable emotions to their children. In such families, the saying, "I'll give you something to cry about," is a common parental response to an upset child. Many children of emotionally phobic parents develop the fear that if they start crying, they'll never stop, which arises because they were never allowed to find out that crying naturally stops on its own when allowed its full expression. Because they grew up with emotionally phobic parents who stepped in to squelch their distress, they never experienced the natural rhythm of a crying episode and how it winds down. It's easy to see how children growing up under these conditions could become fearful of their own emotions. In fact, even positive feelings of joy and excitement can become associated with anxiety. For example, Anthony recalled a painful incident when he joyfully raced out the front door to greet his father as he pulled up in the driveway. Anthony leaped over a small bush, swiped it with his foot, and knocked it over. Instead of appreciating Anthony's display of affection, his father gave him a beating. As a result, Anthony learned not only to be afraid of his father, but to fear spontaneous joy as something that would get him in trouble. They focus on the physical instead of the emotional. Emotionally immature parents can do a good job of taking care of their children's physical and material needs. In the world of food, shelter, and education, these parents may be able to provide everything that's needed. In terms of things that are physical, tangible, or activity related, many of these parents make sure their children get every advantage they can afford. But when it comes to emotional matters, they can be oblivious to their children's needs. Many of my clients have good memories of being well cared for when ill, enjoying their parents' attention, and even receiving presents and favorite foods. But this happened only after their parents were duly convinced they were really sick. They experienced this attentiveness when they were sick as proof of their parents' love. It seemed to be the only time when they remembered receiving lots of attention. This makes sense because caretaking during illness would allow a parent the justification to indulge a child with affection and attention. It stands to reason that affectionate caretaking felt safe to these parents when done for the purpose of restoring the child's physical health. physical aid was more sanctioned than emotional attachment. Being well cared for in non-emotional areas can create confusion in people who grew up feeling emotionally lonely. They have overwhelming physical evidence that their parents loved and sacrificed for them, but they feel a complete lack of emotional security and closeness with their parents. They can be killjoys. Fear of genuine emotion can cause emotionally immature people to be killjoys. As parents, instead of enjoying their children's excitement and enthusiasm, they may abruptly change the subject or warn them not to get their hopes up. In response to their children's exuberance, they're likely to say something dismissive or skeptical to bring it down a notch. When one woman told her mother about her excitement about buying her first house, her mother actually said, "Yes, and then you'll find something else to go on about." They have intense but shallow emotions. Emotionally immature people are easily overwhelmed by deep emotion, and they display their unease by transmuting it into quick reactivity. Instead of feeling things deeply, they react superficially. They may be emotionally excitable and show a strong sentimentality, perhaps being easily moved to tears. Or they may puff up in anger toward anything they dislike. Their reactivity may seem to indicate that they're passionate and deeply emotional, but their emotional expression often has a glancing quality, almost like a stone skipping the surface rather than going into the depths. It's a fleeting reaction of the moment, dramatic but not deep. When interacting with such people, the weirdly shallow quality of their emotions may leave you feeling unmoved by their distress. You might tell yourself that you should be feeling more for them, but your heart can't resonate with their exaggerated reactions. And because they overreact so frequently, you may quickly learn to tune them out for the sake of your own emotional survival. They don't experience mixed emotions. The ability to feel mixed emotions is a sign of maturity. If people can blend contradictory emotions together, such as happiness with guilt or anger with love, it shows that they can encompass life's emotional complexity. Experienced together, opposing feelings tame each other. Once people develop the ability to feel different emotions at the same time, the world ripens into something richer and deeper. Instead of having a single, intense, one-dimensional emotional reaction, they can experience several different feelings that reflect the nuances of the situation. However, the reactions of emotionally immature people tend to be black and white, with no gray areas. This rules out ambivalence, dilemmas, and other emotionally complicated experiences. Differences in quality of thought. In addition to emotional and behavioral differences, there are often intellectual differences between emotionally mature and immature people. If your parent grew up in a family atmosphere that was full of anxiety and judgment, they may have learned to think narrowly and resist complexity. Excessive childhood anxiety leads not only to emotional immaturity, but also to oversimplified thinking that cannot hold opposing ideas in the mind. Repressive or punitive family environments typically don't encourage free thinking or self-expression and therefore aren't conducive to fully developing one's mind. Difficulties with conceptual thinking. Starting in adolescence, children begin to think conceptually, enabling them to solve problems with logic and reasoning instead of knee-jerk impulses. Accelerated brain development means they become both more objective and more imaginative. They can group ideas in categories and quickly think in symbols. They go beyond simply memorizing things and start to evaluate ideas, not just compare facts. They are able to think independently and hypothetically and to generate new insights from previous knowledge. As children enter their teen years, their ability to self-reflect skyrockets because they become able to think about their own thinking. Piaget, 1963. However, the intense emotions and anxiety that emotionally immature people experience can decrease their ability to think at this higher level. Since they are often at the mercy of their emotions, their higher thinking can easily fall apart under stress. In fact, their frequent lack of self-reflection comes from this tendency to regress and temporarily lose their ability to think about their thinking. When emotion-inducing topics come up, their minds fall into rigid black or white thinking that rejects complexity and precludes any cross-pollination of ideas. Emotionally immature people who are otherwise intelligent can think conceptually and show insight as long as they don't feel too threatened in the moment. Their intellectual objectivity is limited to topics that aren't emotionally arousing to them. This can be puzzling to their children, who experience two very different sides to their parents, sometimes intelligent and insightful, other times narrow-minded and impossible to reason with. Proneness to literal thinking. If you listen to the conversations of emotionally immature people, you may notice how routine and literal their thinking is. They tend to talk about what happened or what they observed, not the world of feelings or ideas. For example, one man found his mother's phone conversations draining and boring because she never talked about anything substantive. Instead, she only asked him mundane questions, like what he was doing at the moment or what the weather was like. He told me, "She just reports the facts and never talks about anything other than, here's what happened lately. She doesn't connect with me in the conversation. I get so frustrated and want to say, can't we talk about something meaningful?" But she can't. Intellectualizing obsessively. Another cognitive sign of emotional immaturity is over-intellectualizing and getting obsessed about certain topics. In those areas, emotionally immature people can conceptualize well, indeed excessively, but they don't apply that ability to self-reflection or being emotionally sensitive toward others. Their preoccupation with ideas distracts them from emotional intimacy. They may discuss their favorite topics at length, but they don't really engage with the other person. As a result, they can be as hard to talk to as overly literal thinkers. Although they can think conceptually while communicating their ideas, they're only comfortable if things stay on an impersonal and intellectual level. Summary. Emotional immaturity is a real phenomenon that has been studied and written about for a long time. It undermines people's ability to deal with stress and to be emotionally intimate with others. Emotionally immature people often grow up in a family environment that curtailed their full emotional and intellectual development. As a result, they have an oversimplified approach to life, narrowing situations down to fit their rigid coping skills. Having such a limited sense of self makes them egocentric and undermines their ability to be sensitive to other people's needs and feelings. Their reactive emotions, lack of objectivity, and a fear of emotional intimacy can make close relationships difficult, especially when it comes to their children. In the next chapter, we'll take a look at what it feels like to have a relationship with an emotionally immature parent, along with the challenges adult children face in trying to communicate with such parents. All right, thank you for sticking it through with me. Next week, we'll go over Chapter 3. And if you haven't picked up your own copy, please do so. This is Lindsay Gibson's Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. It was a life-changing book for me, which is why I'm sharing it with you all. Please check out our site, www.findingyourselfsatx.com. Contact us if you'd like to talk to us. And if you want to establish life coaching, we will be happy to do that as well. If I only contact you through YouTube videos, that's cool too. Just please keep your journal handy, and I'll see you next week. Bye, y'all.